Hey, I'm Sid, a high school senior who's currently suffering from acute senioritis, and I've just remembered that I have this YouTube channel. So today I'm going to try to make a coherent YouTube video about something I like talking about, and then continue to make YouTube videos for a little bit longer and maintain some sort of consistency. Today I'll be talking about why I love reading fantasy novels, sci-fi fantasy, whatever you want to call it. That's a little bit different from my usual programming related content on this YouTube channel, but if you're here for that, there'll be a programming video out later this week. But as of right now, let's get into talking about why I like fantasy. I don't get to read a lot these days. I love reading, so I'll still read at least like a book every 2 weeks, but I used to read like a book every week, or maybe 2 or 3. But these days I don't really read too often, but I still enjoy doing so. And a while ago, I got into the idea that if you're not reading something that's like a self-help book or nonfiction, then you're kind of wasting your time reading. This was about a year ago when I was like really into doing like productivity guru stuff. And that's a bit stupid, I think. Thinking that if you're not reading something that's self-help or productivity related, you're wasting your time. It's very stupid. So I love reading a good nonfiction book, but to me, nothing really compares to being able to read a good fantasy book or just any sort of fiction novel, because I like getting sucked into other worlds. And I think that looking at books from purely a utilitarian point of view, that if this doesn't, or anything for that matter, if you're looking at it like, okay, if this doesn't give me some sort of actual value that I'll be able to do anything with, it's kind of stupid. And it really takes away from the enjoyment of the process of reading, which I think has been done to many people when they're reading things solely to learn. It takes away from the enjoyment of reading. So let's talk about why fantasy is my favorite genre. In very simple words, I love being absorbed into another world, which is why I like reading high fantasy books. Or epic fantasy, whatever you want to call it. I'm not a literature scholar. I think that being able to be absorbed into somebody's world based on the vivid descriptions that they write, like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and his world of Middle-earth, that's something that's crazily well written, and it's something that I get drawn into very easily in all of his books, his very numerous books. And I think it's very fun to be able to get into another world and sort of distance yourself from whatever Earth planet thing we live on right now. And I think it's very fun to be able to do so. I also love reading Brandon Sanderson novels because of his amazing world building. And I know Brandon Sanderson fans and their love of his world building and magic systems is a bit of a meme, because that's like all they talk about, but I still love it. I'm a Brandon Sanderson fan, I'll admit it, I like it. And reading series like the Stormlight Archive, set on a fictional planet with a rich setting that contribute to an even more interesting story, makes me feel very happy. A good writer can put images of their world into your head and then make it so that you could really envision yourself there or see yourself as part of the story or as an observer of the story that's happening. Of course, you don't always have to have like extremely detailed 3-page long descriptions of how this one plant moves or something, but it's nice sometimes to be able to get that and not having to do all the thinking on your own. That's a criticism of the fantasy genre, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. And by a little bit later, I mean right now. Many critics of the fantasy genre claim that the genre is oversaturated and that the stories are the same with the same plot, just slightly different characters. You know, they have the same tropes over and over again. You have the chosen one, and then you got the big bad, very clearly evil versus the very clearly good, like farm boy who's just about to go stab him with a very nice magical sword he found. You know, some books, I don't really know what books they might follow something along these lines. I just don't know, but I think they do. Some, maybe some. No offense, Christopher Palvini. He made a book recently called To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, and it's actually a really good science fiction book, but that's for another day. But yeah, there's a lot of fantasy books like that, and it's a very valid criticism. But there's also a ton of fantasy novels that are fresh. They have fresh premises. They take existing tropes, they alter it, and then they tell really interesting stories that are fresh. And I think that is a disservice to the fantasy genre to say they're all the same. One farm boy goes up against a big bad and he wins. They're not like that. And I think giving fantasy a chance is about finding good novels like the Stormlight Archive, which I'll admit are a little bit long. You know, a lot of people claim that fantasy books are very long and not very well written. You know, poor prose. And Brandon Sanderson's books, they're long. Sometimes there's quite a bit of fluff in here that can be removed, but I find it fine because the story and the world building is super interesting. And yeah, that's definitely a meme. People say that that's all Brandon Sanderson's fans have to say as defense, but there are great characters in the Stormlight Archive. There's great themes, and it's something that really sucks you in, regardless of whether you're somebody that really likes fantasy or really doesn't. You'll probably enjoy the Stormlight Archive. But enough about Brandon Sanderson and me being a fanboy. Let's just talk about other authors that do write great prose and not very long books. I recently came across an author called Evan Winter, who wrote The Rage of Dragons, and I forgot the second book's name, but it's very nice. The second book's name is The Fire's Vengeance, and they're very good books. They're kind of long. I think they're around 600-ish pages, but they're super fast-paced, action-packed, and they're pretty nicely written. Quite different to the stereotype that fantasy is given of overly flowery language with overly flowery descriptions. This is kind of just like a really nice, fast-paced action fantasy novel, and I greatly enjoy reading it, and I would suggest reading The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. If you're looking for more of a beautiful prose type thing, then I would suggest reading The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, which is something that you've probably heard about. In the final book of the trilogy is bound to come out at least some point this century. And those criticisms of the fantasy genre about it being long, or winded, not very pretty, I don't find them to be super truthful, especially with the current state of the genre. And I think that giving it a shot is definitely worth it. Thirdly, some people claim that fantasy novels rarely mean anything. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I think it's something about they're not deep enough. And I don't want to be seen as a shill for certain authors, but I think that's also a disservice. There's a lot of good sci-fi fantasy novels that make you think about things, that are deep, really thought-provoking. And, books don't have to be thought-provoking to be enjoyable. They don't have to have great prose to be enjoyable. They don't have to have great dialogue. They don't have to be anything, really. All they have to have is a compelling story to the person at hand, and there's a lot of ways to accomplish that. And I don't think that judging a book based on how deep it is a great way of looking at things, like I mentioned already. There are books that are deep. There are books that will make you think. Patrick Rothfuss's books are nice. Dune, a great science fiction book that makes you think. They're not all mindless drivel, and I don't think many of them are mindless drivel. They all tell their own stories. They all have questions that they raise. Some a little bit less developed than others, but they all raise questions. And as long as you're having fun reading something, it's a good book to at least you, and that's all that really matters. Genre snobbery needs to go, but there's plenty of videos and articles and books on that, and I don't have to talk about what's already been said. So if my poorly constructed rant and poorly edited video has somehow convinced you to perhaps give fantasy a shot, then here's a few starting points that I would suggest. I'll leave all the links in the description, along with links to my Twitter and Discord server. So if you want to follow me on there and join my Discord server and subscribe to stay up to date with the channel, that'd be very cool. And if you found this rant not cringy, then definitely subscribe. I also suggest getting started by reading The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. Like I mentioned, it's a great book. It's fast-paced. It's super cool. It's about a guy that's really solely minded on revenge. It's a very fun read. I don't have the actual physical copy because I do most of my reading on my Kindle. But it's a super good book. I'll leave a link in the description, and you can check it out. I also recommend reading Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. Again, don't have a physical copy, but it's a great series that'll serve as a good intro into the world of epic fantasy. That's all I really have to say. I like reading fantasy books. I am a Brandon Sanderson superfan. I'm a shill for the fantasy genre. I get annoyed when people say that fantasy is a dumb genre and that it's not worth time. It's not worth your time reading. Sure, there's a lot of sometimes overly enthusiastic descriptions of things, but the stories are great. The characters are great, and it's just a fun time. So, tell me your thoughts in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and consider subscribing. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.